Well, so we made it. We're done for today. Tomorrow, Fernando will not be with us, so he will be the closing remarks for today. He has prepared a beautiful insights on what we got as lessons learned from today, and he's going to leave the land prepared for the discussion tomorrow. So I leave the floor to you.
Okay, so I was preparing some notes here. But the first word, I think, is gratitude. Gratitude from all of us to all of us. I think it's been a very enriching day. I guess most of us came now with a new perspective on a challenging and complex issue. We were, Ruth and myself, taking notes. In the same time, we were trying to facilitate the progression of one session after the other. It was not easy. And in parallel, 2 or 3 people are taking detailed notes, and we have a several pages document almost there, but it's very kind of draft and preliminary to be read as the conclusions. We try, but it's really too detailed. The document will eventually be converted into a more formal conclusion session. So my last words and this kind of conclusion take us more kind of food for thought, more than an exhaustive, detailed collection of what has been said today, because there are many ideas. My only flow will be basically from the beginning to the very last moment of today. We began with the communication by Mr. Jovet. He presented Chile as a humble country in terms of contributions to emissions, and he was representing also the tensions in that country that made all the implications to move the COP to Madrid. He mentioned many different aspects and presented things that went later on taken by other speakers as well. The fact that no country can do this alone. He was presenting the political wills. No? After that, we got the lecture of Professor Sachs, and obviously he communicated many things. He knows about this issue. He's been working on this issue from many aspects for decades. And one of the things, he was trying to be very synthetic in what is the greatest challenge in the decarbonization. And it was only one word, basically, was knowledge. Knowledge on what to do, pointing to the facts like corruption, greed, power, the lobbies, the inertia as problems. But the solutions will come with the identification of a plan. And from his talk, you can actually envision 3 E's. The E of economics, the E of ethics, the E of engineering. Too much diplomacy, in his words, too many lawyers, too many negotiators, and too little practicalities. So he was presenting the conference of today as an opportunity to put engineers and scientists and technical people up front. No country can do this alone, again, was mentioned, and collectively, we have to set and build a roadmap. Every region needs to collaborate with the region that is nearby, but also in a global world where the things are move around at large scales, the contribution even of the humblest country can be crucial. No? We need answers, no more theory. And he finished with this alarming message of emergency. Then Rector Cisneros made a strong point on how local things can be important, and he was presenting the commitment of the university, and the CVE, the curriculum that has to be already incorporating the notion of climate change and how to go to reduce the emissions from the very education of the people, and how this university in particular was not only supporting this conference, but is engaged in a long-run commitment in this way. After this, we enter in the session of roadmap. The session of roadmap in itself presented many aspects. It's very difficult to summarize, but for instance, Kobe mentioned an interesting play on words, from partnerships to partnering. This idea is basically that partners have to be more active. we tend to distribute roles. Okay, you do this, I do that. More kind of passive. No, you have to actually partnering, to engage into roles that perhaps nobody is covering and to incorporate to the roles that you were assigned beforehand. Maria, for instance, identify the fact that is a little, puzzling, because in academia, in engineers, in these areas, we have the knowledge. But actual data, in most cases, come from the industry. So we have to make a better communication and flow between the data and the knowledge, and not only playing the theory on one side and the practicalities in the other side. Also, it was very interesting to see the vision of circular economy in a very broad perspective, not only focusing on the carbon cycle. It's a cycle about people. It's a cycle about many other things, about materials, about resources in a general perspective. No? The fair transition involves people, and it's not only because of a question of ethics, but also it's a question of functioning. So the roadmap was very inspiring. Continuing with the sessions of today, we then enter with Manfred, who said, after 27 years, politics have not delivered. Now we have to work in the how. And then the sessions on the how started. You may remember this afternoon, evening, we had two, and before lunch we had another two on the how to do things. The technology, many aspects, many details were presented. Some of them were known by some of you, but the overall perspective, just ingredient pieces of information. No? We all suffer about the limitations on the batteries, for instance, so we need better and cheaper batteries urgently. The importance of accompanying mandates with accompanying measures, with understanding the market, the transition of the economy of the new technologies. Joan Herrera said something like, well, he presented several questions that were shocking. He was trying to provoke, no? For instance, he said, should we take away gas from our lives, especially in temperate zones? City-territory pact requires a new dialectic between countryside and the city. Look at the way we arrange the sessions today. Actually, the cities are something. Well, the cities are surrounded by a countryside, and the two kind of systems requires probably closer connections. The French conflict was a good example presented, saying that, look how complex the things can be, and with the best of the intentions to reduce the carbon emissions, then you get a social conflict that is now expanding and hard to really find direct solutions to it. Well, we also saw interesting little examples like the city of Rosario in Argentina. Daniela was bringing interesting local visions on how they were making the energy more efficient, how proud they felt about having a certification of the houses that were efficient in terms of energy. Despite all of this, she was recognizing that only 9% reduction of emission was at the reach. So the capacity was all the way up to only 9%, but it's worth the effort, or at least in her words, and I think probably in the mind of all of us. We traveled to Indonesia, and we saw some of the challenges of a place with 100 islands, the distribution of energy. That is something to think, and not to immediately do as you do in other places. I mean, in Spain, we don't have 100 islands. The things goes in a completely different way. Don't export what works here. Try to think here and locally. No? And this connects with another interesting concept that is more about thinking than doing, is the identification of bottlenecks, bottleneck logistics, where there is a point in which all the systems really becomes very intensive in carbon. We heard the intentions of the aviation sector. It's interesting how much they can move into the technological way, into the technology areas, but there are many other aspects associated to this way of transport that probably requires a very honest discussion in the society as a whole. We also address in the session of transport the issues of long-haul navigation, how hard it is to abate this, and what are the current technologies. Apparently, again, one more speaker was saying that some technologies are there, perhaps not at the right scale yet, but the technology is opening opportunities. Some word of cautions were presented by FIBE, saying that not much on synthetic biofuels because of the environmental risk. Sometimes the technologies must be revised not only in terms of carbon, but also in terms of other environmental potential impacts. José Manuel Vasallo presented an interesting paradox, or a trade-off, or whatever you want to call it, two things that tend to go opposite ways along the human history: the reduction of mobility versus no compromise of the quality of life. So reaching this equilibrium of reducing the mobility, but keeping the quality of life in good terms is really an ambitious goal that might be, and is probably likely to be, important in the agendas. What else? Well, many things. It's really hard to synthesize the session on industrial processes, those steel, concrete, fertilizer things. No? There were many points. We know about how intensive they are in terms of carbon, and there are warning words interesting also to consider. If we move away from fossil fuels, then we are consuming land and water. So probably, again, we need to reach an equilibrium, and we need to see more than one perspective, not only carbon, right? We saw many examples. I'm not going to enter into details. Probably you may know even much more than I about hydrogen, ammonia, or the hydrocarbon decarbonization possibilities we've been exposed to. For instance, the fossil-free steel and the possibilities of implement this in actually a large scale in a couple of years, by the example that Martin brought today. There are many things that can be said, and regarding the last session on cities, I better don't ruin the image that you have. It's so recent that you probably have taken your own mental notes, much interesting and more lively than the ones that I can bring today. I think it is very interesting and stimulating to see key progresses on zero carbon cities all over the world. So for tomorrow, there are two sessions waiting for you. The day of tomorrow will be from 9 to 12, and the two sessions, instead of being very topical, will be more cross-cutting issues. We'll be promoting the necessary discussion among different sectors that typically present conferences, talks, and workshops independently. Finally, as a little play, I was making a list of words, keywords. I think most of us came to this conference, especially under the tense international situation in many countries, actually in one of them that pushed the COP to Madrid. So we have all these in mind, in addition to the problems of the climate emergency. We came with words like complexity, commitment, emergency, crisis, problems. And I think after the sessions of today, we may now have another list. The list can be alliances, countries, people, actors, technology, ready, opportunities, hopes, decarbonization, land, water, ecology, and finally solutions, actions, planned, and above all, together. Thank you.